Yes.
All right. So welcome everyone to Amazing Community Pointers from our partners session. We are really thrilled to have Arthur Woods, who is the co-founder of Mathison and one of our prominent partners of Amazing Community, come and share with us some insights on how to navigate the labor market, especially now as we see a lot more of the shortages. One statistics that we hear is there are 3 job openings for every 1 seeker, yet we experience challenges when it comes to finding the perfect match, when it comes to knowing how to find organizations that are actually looking to hire people from diverse backgrounds and underserved and underprivileged communities, when it comes to recognizing an environment where it's not just going to be a place where we are welcome, but we can thrive for the long term. So I am really thrilled to have Arthur, who recently published a book and has been a wealth of information when it comes to job search, to with the look at it from diversity perspective and ensuring diverse access, equitable access, and organizations who are really changing their practices to be more inclusive. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it on to Arthur. Arthur, please introduce yourself a little bit more about your background and what you've been doing.
Oh, thank you, Stella. Thank you. Yes, well, it's wonderful to meet everyone, and I really just love what you all are doing, and we're huge Amazing Community fans. And Stella, huge shout out to you. You've just been such a great advocate in this work and in our growth. So first of all, my name is Arthur. My pronouns are he, him. It's just a quick background. I grew up in an evangelical community in rural Northern California. I was taught in early life that being gay was a sin, that I had to follow a very kind of rigid path to be successful. And I ended up actually going to college on the East Coast and moved across the country. And I came out as gay halfway through college, so had a really amazing kind of awakening, and it caused me to fundamentally rewrite my story of everything. And I think that was in part, how I looked at success in work, how I looked at my own future path in my career. And I was struggling with this identity crisis. As I started, my first couple jobs, I realized that I wasn't actually, I didn't feel safe coming out at work. So I, experienced homophobia in my very first jobs. Actually found myself hiding the fact that I was gay, and felt like a different person fundamentally at work than I was at home. And for a while, I really thought that I had to be a different, basically a completely different person in a professional, sort of realm of success. And I became very passionate about, work when I entered a job at Google, and I had a manager who was also gay. I felt embraced in the hiring process. I felt as though I could be my full best self at work, and that actually fundamentally changed the way I looked at work. It all of a sudden, work was not something that was just a means to an end for me. It became a place that I felt a sense of self-actualization. I felt a great sense of purpose in my job. And it led me to bring myself to work in a completely different way. So when we talk later on about, the business case behind diversity, I realized firsthand that this was a classic example of what happens to someone when they feel a sense of belonging at work every day. And I actually got into the HR technology space. I was at Google for a couple of years, had a chance to lead our educational work at YouTube. And I became very passionate about the idea that we spend the majority of our lives at work. And if we use even my own, story as a case study, I showed up completely differently to work based on the way that I felt and the environment that I was in. And it changed the way I performed, So I thought that it was a very interesting example of how you start to reimagine the environments we create for people and the ways we empower people and the ways we make people feel at work, as a way of not only bringing out the best in humanity, but also like actually driving real, real results for organizations. And I became really fascinated with that, partly because I realized that the vast majority of people show up today at work and don't love what they do and don't feel a sense of purpose and don't usually feel a sense of belonging. So I kind of made it, in this whole transformation, I sort of made it my personal life purpose to look at creative ways we reimagine work and new ways that we approach the way that people feel at work or the way that people join organizations to bring out the best in people's lives and to bring out the best in society. So I got into this realm, as Stella knows, in HR technology, with this idea that we can use technology for the greater good and to bring out humanity in work where we spend the majority of our lives. And that led me down some really interesting paths. One was actually, I ended up getting a chance to start a couple different nonprofit organizations centered around workforce development and advocacy, but also to launch a couple different technology companies. And the most recent one is a company called Mathison, which is focused on the idea of building equity and inclusion in the workforce through the lens of hiring. And what we realized when we launched Mathison a couple of years ago was that so many organizations right now are, as they're growing, they're wanting to grow in a more inclusive and representative way, and yet are really reliant on archaic ways of hiring and still actually fundamentally the design of the workforce today, which is resembling the design of the workforce of the industrial age. Most of the constructs that we have in today's workforce are treating work as though we're all on a factory line still, and treating the way people feel at work as though work is a bad thing. And then when we get to the conversation of equity and inclusion, there are still fairly outdated approaches to the way that we look at growing diversity within most organizations. So our whole thesis with Mathison was, let's look at new creative ways to reimagine how we create equity and inclusion at work. And let's start with helping leaders develop a holistic view of what they mean by diversity, because so often we have a myopic view of how we even look at underrepresented job seeker communities. And that means that when we walk into the conversation of hiring, oftentimes leaders are only thinking of diversity based on what they can see and not so many other amazing communities. So we actually began to lead research in the space, and we realized that there were at least 13 marginalized and underrepresented communities that were not accounted for in most organizations' hiring practices that we needed to account for. And they included, of course, communities that Amazing Community is already doing such a great job of leading and in supporting, such as the older experienced worker community. And we started to look at the population of people with disabilities and veterans and refugees and immigrants and the formerly incarcerated community, and realized that we need to actually elevate all of these communities in the context of hiring if we want to truly build inclusive organizations. We started to build technology centered around the idea of removing bias from the hiring process or addressing it, because so often we could source the most incredible candidates from all communities, but if they enter a hiring process that's inaccessible or that is subjective and isn't fair and accessible for everyone, those candidates from different communities, really have barriers that they immediately are forced with. So we've basically built technology that is helping organizations cast a wider net in their sourcing and take equitable approaches to the hiring process itself, so that ideally they're leading in the most fair and consistent way. And when they are approaching their diversity, equity, inclusion work, it's sustainable, it involves their whole organization, and it's ideally inclusive. So we've loved the partnership with Amazing Community. We have a lot of cool new research coming out. We have a book actually that we're publishing in August called Hiring for Diversity. It's the first dedicated book on diversity hiring, which should be really exciting. And we actually feature Stella in the book, so we were really thrilled that she could comment and be part of it. So with that said, Stella, I'll open it up for questions, and maybe we can have some conversations around around, some of the needs that we're hearing from folks. But I'd love to maybe just pause there and find out, what questions you might have.
I do have a question, and this hopefully will give time to others to start thinking their own. So when you talk about bias in hiring practices or in the workplace, in what form that shows up, and what each one of us can do in terms of mitigating that bias, because a lot of the biases are very internalized. We speak in a certain way, we say, oh, I'm dating myself. So there are certain little signals and cues that we do that will perpetuate that bias or amplify it. So can you talk a little bit more about the biases in general?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you asking that, Stella. And I think one thing to note right away is that biases, as we've written about and talked about, in many ways have kind of been vilified in the way that they've been addressed. And so a couple kind of notes on bias. One is they are completely natural. They unconscious bias, of course, occurs because our brain is getting 40,000 bits of information at every moment and can only process, 40, right? And so mental shortcuts, and heuristics that our brain processes are completely natural. I think sometimes there's this misconception that we need to kind of rid ourselves of bias. Like one day we'll just take a pill or we'll attend this magical training and all of a sudden we're just unbiased people, right? We will always have bias. It's the way we survive. It actually is truly a survival mechanism in our brains, right? What we can do, however, in the context of hiring especially, is address the fact that bias shows up consistently and subjectivity shows up when we abandon process and consistency. And it shows up when we don't have the mechanisms to reflect on decisions that we made. So when we go off the cuff, when we go off of gut, when we sort of approach everything in somewhat of a last minute and unstructured way, what do? We basically are operating on autopilot and we make decisions based on all of the previous ways we've been wired, right? So the way that we intentionally address this is by actually looking at the whole process that each of us participates in when we look at something like hiring, right? We make a decision like the moment we go to someone's LinkedIn profile, we start assessing that person, right? The moment we look at a resume, there are things that catch our eye. So building systems and structures along the way and being mindful of how we're making decisions and why we're making decisions and reflecting on that. The moment I disqualify a candidate, I try to understand, okay, what was the reason I was really doing that? Can I pinpoint that they don't have the skills needed for this role, or am I going off of instinct? And that becomes dangerous when it's the latter. We found in our research that the vast majority of bias shows up in the interview process, surprisingly. If we think about it, we spend the majority of our time in interviews. Typically, leaders, especially myself included, go off of a lot of confidence that I've interviewed 1 billion people, right? I know what I'm doing. I know this role very well. I know what I'm looking for. It's worked out for me in the past. These are all great excuses to abandon process. So what we do at Mathison is we've developed a very structured interview approach. Everyone needs to follow the same script in interviews for all the candidates that they're interviewing. We all need to fill out the same structured scorecard, and we need to do so independently so to avoid groupthink. And we need to, if anyone abandons this process, the whole thing disintegrates, right? One single broken link ruins the whole system. And so we've tried to really be mindful of specific steps like that, right? Because we know so much time is invested in that process, a structured and premeditated approach makes such a difference. The final thing I'll just note is our communication. Stella, you were alluding to this. The words that we use really matter. And it's amazing how, just being aware of micro inequities or exclusionary terms that we use. We wrote in the book about the fact that there's terminology that even 10 years ago would have been considered appropriate to describe certain communities that today is not, right? The population of people with disabilities does not prefer to be called handicapped or special needs, and yet those terms still get thrown around on a regular basis. We know that the older experienced worker community, has been called retirees or other terms that don't necessarily either resonate or are not accurate, right? And so we try to really be mindful of inclusive communication and also to acknowledge that it will forever change. The terms that we use today that are embraced by certain communities today will not be tomorrow. So we have to constantly be asking, am I using the right terminology? And it's amazing how like picking up on that, can be a real deterrent for certain job seekers. And so we've tried to really empower everyone to just be mindful and constantly in a learning mode when it comes to how we communicate.
So we have two comments in the chat. One from Jeff. I'm not camera ready today, but appreciate finding out about your company. I'm interested in how the technology walks the hiring manager through casting wider net for candidates. I imagine a series of questions to fool the mind into removing the bias.
Yeah, really good question. So the way that works is we've created, actually, I can show you this tool. We've created a tool called our Diversity Sidekick. And it provides an app that you can give to every hiring manager to really support them in this journey. One is it enables folks to analyze text that they're writing to see, did I write any exclusionary terms? Did I use a term that was corporate jargon or buzzword or a term that might not be perceived as inclusive for certain communities? We have a tool in the app that enables you to develop your own structured interview scripts. So if you're a hiring manager and you're aware that, like me, sometimes you make up interviews as you go, we give you a tool to actually structure your own interviews. And from a sourcing standpoint, the tool anonymizes LinkedIn profiles. So it enables you to immediately hide, name and picture and graduation year. Actually, a lot of things that would cause age bias, believe it or not. And we enable you also to see if any of the candidates that you're speaking to are part of communities that we're connected to. So if for example, if a candidate that we're talking to has indicated on LinkedIn that they're part of Amazing Community, it will flag, oh, Amazing Community is one of our partners and you should engage that person. So we've tried to build in finally awareness training to this as well, so that the tool has modules and resources around building awareness of different communities.
Fantastic. And it's amazing to see that on one side you have technology that is perceived as this negative thing that gets in the way just because it requires a lot of upskilling and not everyone is comfortable with it. On the flip side, it actually is the solution because it simplifies a lot of those decisions that then lead to gut feeling conclusions and bias ultimately. We have another question from Rosalie. 490 applications, no interviews. What are your hiring algorithms based on? Even text analytics has bias. How do you remove these?
Let's see. Sorry. So, and Rosalie, could you clarify when you said the 490 applications? Could you clarify what you meant by that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I am well qualified and have 490 applications in 2 or 3 years. I have not ever received an interview.
Yeah.
So that sort of doesn't, I often hear that you can be dated on interviews. But so I write code in Python and R and have a recent master's. And so I know the data algorithms are normally based on. The training data that certainly is, it tends to be the employees that you already have. And so if it's the employees you already have, that is systematically biased because the employees you already have, I mean, aren't diverse.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with this because they're relying on their existing homogenous teams to make decisions on their next teams. And if there isn't awareness, if there isn't engagement of the hiring process, everything else fails. I'll tell you, Rosalie, my mother and I have this conversation a lot. She's a Princeton grad. She's in her early 70s, and she loves working and she wants to continue working. She's applied to new jobs and she's immediately been denied at the door. And it's completely because of age bias. Their ageism is running rampant in our society. I think it's especially pervasive in technology in the sector that we're in, and as Stella can tell you, because of all the great advisory work she does. I think
by the way, I'm in my mid-50s. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and you're far younger than my mother. I mean, I think we still see age bias show up, with certain roles when someone's not in their 20s. We had this issue at Google. There was this conversation around, a lot of hiring managers were asking, is someone going to be a culture fit? Which we know is to us a 4-letter word. We should not use that term at all.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are still very validated and feeling that way, or they feel very validated saying, I'm afraid, and you hear a lot of these micro inequities against populations of different generations. I'm afraid so-and-so won't be able to keep up. I'm afraid so-and-so, may not, the comp expectations might be exorbitantly higher than what we've actually accounted for in this role. So, we've done work with AARP, and what we actually wrote about, and Stella was in the book also speaking to this, was the fact that we can demystify that there are way more similarities among generations than there are differences. And it's such a misconception to generalize populations based on the year that they were born, and not to account for their actual skills and their interests. There are many people, as we all know, who are extremely passionate to change careers, or to maybe move to a different function, and there isn't sensitivity about what level that will be at, or what comp it will be. There's been so much more data to show that people of generations that aren't millennial and Gen Z actually are way more likely to stay in the job longer and actually perform. So, I think for us, we've been trying to tell that story, that we need to be mindful across generations and not try to generalize. And I think there are employers that are waking up to that and realizing we need for generational diversity to be just as much a part of our definition as everything else.
I appreciate that.
Arthur, maybe you can share a little bit on how people can join Mathison to take advantage of all the connections and the work that you do on placements that you offer.
Absolutely. So we have a link I can send it over to you called members@mathison.io, and this is our job board, and our place where you can sign up. You can create an account. We are very adamant about showing an inclusive definition of diversity when we first walk into the room, and we first sign up with an organization. And basically, what we try to do more than anything is help employers. Many employers have come to us and they've said, hey, we have a very narrow definition. We have narrow goals. We need, essentially, we need, we're just looking for women or people of color. That's those are two huge, kind of areas where there are a lot of goals right now. And we're trying to also just make sure that employers are, again, they're not limiting what, how they can look at building a representative workforce. And also that their team members who are making decisions every day are aware. So there are a couple different ways we can work together. One is we have a job board with all of the active roles that we're sourcing for. We work with over 90 employers today, of all shapes and sizes, who are trying to expand their workforce in a very representative way. If you're ever in an organization that's also trying to approach more equitable hiring and wanting to cast a wider net in sourcing, we do a lot of work to help equip employers with sustainable ways to do this work. And so that is, to us, kind of how we try to work with both both groups, job seekers who are looking for inclusive employers where they can work and employers who are committed to equity and inclusion.
So Rosalie, create your profile and look up what type of jobs and openings are available. And everyone else who is listening to this in a recorded version, please do so. We have a couple of other questions. So from Bethy, Mathison has a structured interviewing process and you have a tool to offer clients, but how do you advise clients if they are using biased hiring techniques? Do you look at your clients' interview surveys?
Good question. Yeah. So we have an assessment called our Equal Hiring Index, and it enables us to basically audit an organization's hiring practices. And rather than make this a, basically kind of a one-time only process, a lot of organizations at some point in time in their journeys, essentially, hire a consultant to come in and do an assessment of, where do we have bias in our process? Where do we need to improve? And we realize that a lot of that is just a one-time only process. So we've created an assessment system that enables employers to basically assess across their entire hiring process, where is there potential bias? Where's there room to improve accessibility? It gives them a scorecard and it gives them a set of recommendations. And rather than make that a one-time only experience, we do it on a quarterly basis with them. So our goal is through the partnership to have an ongoing equitable experience, help employers make basically governance, systemic changes to their work. And again, to do so in an ongoing effort, because we realize that this work will have to continue to evolve. It's never going to be, it's never really going to be finished, right?
Yeah. It's a continuous work and it's very easy to slip up. And what I loved is what you said earlier around the fact that organizations many times just focus on 1 or 2 or 3 segments. For the most part, that is driven by the reporting requirements that they have to disclose to EOC and whatever the current pressure is in the society to focus on. But we also have to recognize that every single one of us is unique in its in our needs, in our abilities, in our preferences, life stage.
Yeah.
So the more you can think about this inclusive way of designing the environment that works for everyone, the better we'll be able to design for outliers, not just for the people in the middle of the bell curve.
Oh my gosh, completely. I think that's spot on, Stella.
So Amy is asking, go on, Amy.
Yeah, no, I think what you just said, Stella, which is, I think risk has been shifted in the last decade since the recession, so that the risk is now more on the employee versus the employer. And Peter Capelli has written extensively about this. So I think bias is an issue, but the issue that Stella just really brought up is this issue of, or you brought up is, people are hiring to the middle of the curve, and yet they may not be taking advantage of more outlier candidates. This would include maybe more experience or age or whatever. But so how do you really adjust for kind of how risk has shifted, get companies to be less risk averse, maybe take a chance on somebody that's a little different?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it's philosophical to ask, so if we really value diversity, we look at diversity of thought, what is it that we want to see shift in our organization? And so it is helping leaders understand kind of first that holistic definition of diversity, and what we mean by it. Second, to really start assessing how are you going to achieve that now? And I think what's the expression? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting to have different outcomes. I think that's the same for hiring. If diversity is important and we are intending to simply just do the same thing we've always done to achieve that, that doesn't add up. It's not going to work. And so we are trying to, first of all, empower employers to kind of break the mold a little bit. One is develop a holistic definition of what we mean by diversity. Second, take a systemic approach to how we change it. And this is not going to be simply that we just find new candidates to source, or that we simply send everyone through a one-time unconscious bias training and our work is all done. It's going to come down to us very deliberately making a change across the board. And we hope in that process, being iterative. The other piece that we've really been trying to focus on is the fact that a lot of times right now, employers we're working with believe that this work will only should be the responsibility of the HR team. So, what's happened is, the human resources or recruitment team has said, okay, well, we're the ones driving this, we're the ones increasing diversity. And then, everyone else just needs to kind of sit and wait. And what that's meant is that we're not actually achieving the network effect that's possible within our organizations. When we present, this is what's really interesting. I've given presentations to teams of 500 people on the work, and we've presented the holistic definition of diversity, which accounts for, the older experienced worker community. And it's amazing. Or, the big one that pops up is people with disabilities or neurodiverse individuals. And what's really interesting is the comments I start to read or hear from people, realizing, wow, I never thought of that. I never thought of the communities that you're listing here as part of the diversity strategy or priorities, but I know people that we should be hiring from these communities. And a lot of people say my own kids or my own, and you realize that just that transparency and awareness for people of what we mean by diversity starts to change fundamentally, like what the possibilities are. And how amazing when you start to make that something everyone's involved in, because we can start to see, wow, like we really can unlock the collective network of everyone that's around the table right now.
And it's so interesting when you talk about the network effect. And this is one of the premise behind the Amazing Community, because we do believe when you belong to a supportive group of individuals who are on a similar journey, or maybe they are 5 seconds ahead of you, there is a confidence that starts building in you, because you say, I can cross that 5 second chasm and get to that next step. Or and I've seen this personally, most of the time, a lot of the opportunities come through your network and the people who you know. And usually those are the weak connections in your network, not necessarily the very close friends. So the more we can build that community support that we can have and surround ourselves with people who are like-minded, who are passionate about similar topics, who can then help give us the confidence and support when we're at the lowest point, and then encourage us when we're starting to go up. I think the more we'll be able to find that perfect match and perfect solution, perfect job that we're seeking.
I love that. I really love that. I think that's spot on, Stella.
So can you tell a little bit more how Mathison supports the candidates from different diverse groups when it comes to the job search? What exactly do you do?
Yeah. Well, the big thing is what we're doing on the employer side, which is we're trying to basically shift employers' practices, awareness, policies, and engagement of their teams, so that you, as job seekers, walk into an inclusive environment. So our theory of change is that nothing's going to change. I mean, and Rosalie, you said this brilliantly, like, 490 applications, right? Like, we have a lot of job seekers from underrepresented groups who feel extremely frustrated. They're doing all the right steps, right? They're, thoughtfully finding opportunities. They're writing great cover letters and resumes. They have all the right experiences. What needs to change is the way employers are acting right now. And employers, despite a lot of the investment in diversity, continue to lead with a lot of bias and a lot of inequitable systems. And we don't believe any of that's going to change until we essentially, walk in and start, helping employers make the change. And so that's what we're really focused on. And so it's kind of a roundabout approach to how we're supporting the job seekers. Certainly, job seekers have the ability to sign up with us, create profiles, find opportunities with inclusive employers. But the commitment that we're making is we're trying to work with these employers so that they are creating equitable systems. They're expanding the way they look at diversity. And they're hopefully also building environments where people can stay and advance. And that's a huge one. I mean, we focus so much on the hiring, but nothing's going to work after someone's hired if they're not walking into an inclusive, culture where people feel a sense of belonging. And I think a lot of times we're finding that such a narrow view on hiring without addressing inclusion afterwards makes it so, there's a leak in the bottom of our bucket, right? We have to really address that.
Exactly. Any other questions from the audience? Amy, would you like to ask it?
I always have more questions. A lot has been said about, remote work and companies pulling together hybrid models of remote work, but bottom line is there's more remote work out there and there's more opportunity. I'm curious how you've seen that change things up for your employer companies. Is remote work really changing things and how they think about sourcing candidates?
Definitely. I'm glad you asked. Yes, first of all, this is a conversation everyone's now kind of grappling with, which is what do we do about remote work? Do we let everyone come back? Do we ask everyone to come back? Do we let everyone work wherever they want? It's becoming a major driver in job seekers' decisions as to which employers, basically which employers, you want to go and work for. So basically what's happening is job seekers now, instead of saying, you're going to have to, just optimize your job search around how much money you're going to make. Now it's, okay, do I have autonomy? Do I have an organization that's going to give me the liberties to work wherever I want? So a lot of employers that are taking what we find to be a very kind of conservative or restrictive approach to this are losing great people, both in terms of applicants and existing team members. And the other piece that's happening in general is employers are reimagining what's possible because they were forced into, the pandemic. I mean, there were so many folks I worked with a year ago, and Sally, you can attest to this, who would have said a year ago before the pandemic, it's impossible for our people to work remotely. There's no way it'll happen. And they were forced into it. So now that, employers were opened up to, wow, there were things that we didn't think were possible that now are, they're beginning to also think, okay, maybe there were other things we need to kind of reevaluate. So that I think is a really positive note. For us, we do believe that virtual work or being able to hire folks from across geographies is a big win for diversity. It's a huge win for accessibility. It's a win for people of alternative lifestyles. We have so many working families who are able to literally work from anywhere, and they don't have to worry about a commute. They're able to spend more time with their kids. There's just so much that's actually been a win for this. I think we have to kind of constantly evaluate what does this mean for the way that people feel at work? Now that people are working remotely, how do you still build community? And that's why, of course, Amazing Community is important and groups like it, because we need to find ways that we're continuously, connecting and still building, collaboration.
Ashley is asking, what companies are you currently working with? So you listed 90. Can you give a few names?
So a few things. We're working with groups like Sonos. We work with groups like Accenture, Bristol Myers Squibb. So some of the bigger folks, but then also a lot of high growth startups, and many of whom are really, they're growing quickly and they're wanting to also be invested in diversity early on. So it's been a really cool mix. We work with groups like Glossier. We work with a couple different nonprofits like the Sundance Institute, the World Economic Forum. I like to think we have a really cool roster of organizations. They're all committed to equity and inclusion. They're all at different stages of the journey. So it's been great.
Any particular type of skill sets that you found that are highly sought, and a lot of these companies who are committed to the diversity are recognizing and are trying to attract? Anything that Amazing Community members could benefit or pursue in terms of acquiring?
So actually, one is that we have a great let me actually pull this up really quickly. We have a great set of events that are coming up, all on equity and inclusion and how to build it into the workforce, really from a lens of cultural competency. So feel free to RSVP for any of our events. We have a lot of really cool things always happening there. And so we would encourage everyone to participate. We have great conversations with leaders across the board. And I think that's really what's special for us, is this is a community, right? It's a community of like-minded leaders who want to see change, who are either part of it from a job seeker perspective or from a leadership perspective within organizations. And I think a big note for us is that this work shouldn't be done alone. we should constantly be collaborating to push things forward.
Excellent. So Arthur, this was absolutely wonderful. I will close with a few parting thoughts from Amazing Community, and just share a little bit more. Would love to hear from you with the feedback. If you can take a few minutes, literally 2 questions, so we can get an idea of whether these sessions are of value. I'll paste the link in the chat as well. Additionally, I wanted to let you all know about upcoming events. We have a few of them in the queue. The first one is Innovate with Innovators. So we are partnering with an organization called Breathe Happy, which is an online yoga platform that is also using a lot of the video data to train the algorithms that can give you back feedback on your posture, on your alignment, etc. So it's a cool way to use technology for something as non-technical as yoga. We also have another session with one of our core team members, David Miller, who is going to share a little bit more about how you can practically think about cyber securing yourself, your devices, your life in general. We have a session with Shezi on how you can examine the workplace and recognize a workplace that it's inclusive, where you can bring your talent to. And we also have another conversation with an inspiring story of an individual who created a company that provides unforgettable experiences to older people. As a reminder, Amazing Community is a community of women over 45. We are navigating the present and future work together. And the focus really is on how digital technology is disrupting our world, but also opening up opportunities for all of us. We are here to expand the work horizon for women. And we curate different resources, we bring events, we collaborate with innovators to bring all of this thought leadership and research to you. And it is really about us together learning and connecting and supporting each other. If you're interested to join our newsletter, sign up on our website. If you're ready to become a member, it's free to join. Just create a profile on our website, and then you'll get on the notification distribution list from us. And then if you have any questions, please send an email to info@amazing.community. We really thank you for your time. We really thank Arthur for being part of our journey, and for all the support and partnership you provide, and for all the support that you provide to all the people who find jobs through you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stella. This was wonderful. Really appreciate it.